My name is Edith. I am 62 years old. Today, I sit in the back row of St. Mary's Church. My heart pounds like a drum. My hands shake as I hold a white envelope in my purse. The bride looks beautiful in her flowing dress. She is 28. The groom straightens his tie and smiles. He is my husband of 40 years. Well, my ex-husband now. People whisper and stare at me. They wonder why I came. Some think I am brave. Others think I am foolish. But they don't know what I know. They don't know what is inside this envelope. After 4 decades together, David threw me away like old furniture. He said I was boring. He said I was too old. He wanted someone young and exciting, someone who made him feel alive again. But today, everyone will learn the truth about David. Today, his perfect new life will crumble, and I will finally get the justice I deserve. Let me tell you how we got here. Let me tell you our story. Please leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from to see how far my story has reached. And please like the video and subscribe for more sassy revenge stories. I met David when I was 22. He was 24 and worked at a small accounting firm downtown. I was a secretary at the same building. Every morning, he would buy coffee from the shop next door. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee with 1 sugar. One rainy Tuesday, he forgot his umbrella. I offered to share mine. We walked 6 blocks together, talking about everything and nothing. He made me laugh with his silly jokes. I made him smile with my stories about my 3 cats. David was different then. He was kind and gentle. He listened when I spoke. He remembered small details about my day. When I got sick with the flu, he brought me soup and stayed to watch old movies. We married 2 years later in a simple ceremony. My dress cost $50. His suit was borrowed from his brother. We couldn't afford much, but we were happy. We had each other, and that felt like everything. Our first apartment was tiny. The kitchen was so small we could barely fit a table. The heater didn't work well in winter, but we made it cozy. David would read to me in the evenings. I would cook his favorite meals on weekends. Money was tight those first few years. David worked long hours to get promoted. I took on extra typing jobs at night. We saved every penny we could. Our dream was to buy a house and start a family. When David finally got his promotion, we celebrated with cheap champagne. We toasted to our future. We talked about the children we would have. We picked out names and imagined what they would look like. 3 years later, our son Michael was born. David cried when he held him for the first time. 2 years after that came our daughter Sarah. Our little family felt complete. I quit my job to stay home with the babies. David worked harder than ever. He said he wanted to give us the best life possible. He wanted to be a good provider. I admired his dedication. I supported his dreams. We bought our first house when Michael turned 5. It had 3 bedrooms and a big backyard. David planted a garden. I painted the kitchen yellow. The kids played on the swing set every afternoon. Those were good years. David came home for dinner most nights. We went on family vacations to the lake. We attended school plays and soccer games. We were partners in everything. But success changed David. As his career grew, so did his ego. He started working later and later. He missed more dinners. He forgot important dates. When I tried to talk to him, he said I didn't understand the pressure he was under. David became obsessed with making more money. He wanted a bigger house, a fancier car, expensive clothes. He said these things mattered for his image. He said clients expected him to look successful. I felt like I was losing my husband. The man who once brought me soup when I was sick now barely noticed when I was upset. The man who used to read to me in the evenings now stayed at his office until midnight. I tried to be understanding. I told myself this was just a phase. Once he achieved his goals, things would go back to normal. We would find our way back to each other. But normal never came. David only grew more distant. He started taking business trips that lasted for weeks. He bought a new cell phone and guarded it carefully. He showered as soon as he came home, even if he had showered at the gym. When I asked about his day, his answers became short and vague. When I suggested we take a weekend trip together, he said he was too busy. When I dressed up for our anniversary dinner, he barely looked at me. Our children grew up and moved away. Sarah went to college in California. Michael got married and moved to Texas. Suddenly, David and I were alone in our big house. The silence between us felt deafening. I suggested we see a marriage counselor. David laughed and said we didn't need help. He said I was being dramatic. He said all couples went through rough patches. But this felt like more than a rough patch. This felt like the end of everything we had built together. One evening, David came home with lipstick on his collar. When I pointed it out, he said he had hugged a client at a business dinner. The explanation felt hollow, but I wanted to believe him. Then came the late-night phone calls. David would step outside to answer them. He said they were work emergencies. But work emergencies don't make a man smile the way David smiled during those calls. I started noticing other things. New cologne, a gym membership he actually used, expensive haircuts, clothes that were more stylish than anything he had worn in years. Friends began giving me strange looks at social gatherings. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Someone was talking about me, but I didn't know what they were saying. The truth came from the most unexpected place. David's secretary, Mrs. Henderson, had worked with him for 15 years. She was a kind woman who always asked about our children. One day she called me at home. Her voice shook as she spoke. She said she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She said David was having an affair with a young woman named Jessica. Jessica worked at the coffee shop across from his office, the same coffee shop where David bought his morning coffee. Mrs. Henderson had seen them together many times. They held hands in restaurants. They kissed in parking lots. David had even introduced Jessica to some of his clients as his girlfriend. The news hit me like a truck. I dropped the phone and sat on my kitchen floor. Everything made sense now. The late nights, the business trips, the distance between us. David had replaced me with someone half my age. That night, David came home with flowers. Yellow roses, my favorite. He acted like nothing had changed. He asked about my day and commented on the weather. His performance was almost convincing. But I could see through him now. I could see the lies in his smile. I could hear the guilt in his voice. This man who had promised to love me forever had been living a double life. I confronted him the next morning. He was eating breakfast and reading the newspaper. I sat across from him and said I knew about Jessica. I said I knew about the affair. David's face went white. He set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. For a moment, he looked like he might deny everything. Then his shoulders sagged, and the truth poured out. He said he was sorry. He said he never meant for it to happen. He said Jessica made him feel young again. She made him feel like the man he used to be before responsibilities and mortgages and middle age. I asked him how long it had been going on. He said 6 months. I asked if he loved her. He said yes. I asked if he still loved me. He couldn't answer. David said he wanted a divorce. He said we had grown apart. He said we wanted different things now. He said I would be happier without him. But he also said things that cut like knives. He said I had become boring. He said I didn't take care of myself anymore. He said Jessica was exciting and fun. She made him laugh. She made him feel alive. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw dishes. I wanted to hurt him the way he was hurting me. Instead, I sat there and cried. 40 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. With cruel words and broken promises. David moved out that same week. He rented an apartment across town. He said he needed space to think. But I knew he was moving in with Jessica. He was starting his new life while I sat alone in our empty house. The divorce papers arrived a month later. David wanted to split everything 50-50. He was being generous, his lawyer said. He could have asked for more since he had been the primary earner. But I didn't want his money. I wanted my life back. I wanted the man I had married. I wanted the dreams we had shared. None of those things could be divided by a judge. Though I didn't know it yet, David would eventually pay a price that no lawyer could calculate. The first few months alone were the hardest of my life. I would wake up and forget David was gone. I would cook dinner for 2 people. I would turn to share a joke with someone who wasn't there. Friends tried to help, but their sympathy felt like pity. Some took sides. Others tried to stay neutral. A few disappeared entirely, too uncomfortable with the messiness of divorce. I smiled and thanked them all, but inside something was slowly changing. Something that would surprise everyone, including myself. My daughter Sarah called every day. She was angry at her father and wanted to cut him out of her life. I told her not to choose sides. He was still her dad, no matter what he had done to me. My son Michael was more diplomatic. He said he was sorry things hadn't worked out. He said he hoped David and I could both find happiness. His careful words told me he had already accepted the situation. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Martinez. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She helped me understand that David's affair wasn't my fault. She helped me see that I was worth more than I believed. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I joined a book club at the library. I took a painting class at the community center. I volunteered at the animal shelter. These small steps helped me remember who I was beyond being David's wife. But healing isn't a straight line. Some days were good. Other days, the pain felt fresh and raw. I would see couples holding hands and feel a stab of jealousy. I would hear love songs on the radio and change the station. 6 months after our divorce was final, I heard David was engaged. The news came from Michael, who had tried to break it gently. David and Jessica were planning a big wedding. They had already booked the church and sent save-the-date cards. I felt sick. 6 months. After 40 years together, it had taken David 6 months to replace me completely. I was yesterday's news. Jessica was his bright new future. But David had no idea that his past was about to catch up with him in ways he could never imagine. Around this time, I was cleaning out David's old home office. He had left behind boxes of papers and files. Most of it was junk, but I needed to go through everything before throwing it away. That's when I found the folder marked private. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements for accounts I had never seen. Investment records for properties I didn't know we owned. Tax forms that showed income David had hidden from me. There were also emails printed out and saved. David had been stealing money from his clients for years. He had been moving funds between accounts to cover his tracks. He had been lying to everyone, not just me. One email was particularly shocking. David had fathered a child with another woman 10 years ago. He had been paying support for a daughter I never knew existed. Her name was Emma, and she was 10 years old. I sat surrounded by papers, trying to understand what I was seeing. David wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was a thief and a liar. He had been living multiple lives for years. As I read through each document, a strange feeling grew inside me. For the first time since our divorce, I felt like I had power again. My first instinct was to call the police. David had committed crimes. People had been hurt by his actions. He deserved to face consequences. But then I wondered if anyone would believe me. David was respected in the community. He played golf with judges and had dinner with city officials. I was just the bitter ex-wife with an axe to grind. I called Dr. Martinez and told her what I had found. She suggested I speak with a lawyer. She said I needed to protect myself legally before doing anything else. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was a sharp man in his 50s. He looked through David's papers and whistled low. He said this was serious fraud. He said David could go to prison if prosecuted. Mr. Peterson advised me to gather more evidence. He said the authorities would need a strong case to go after someone like David. He said I should be very careful about how I proceeded. I spent weeks copying documents and organizing evidence. I created a timeline of David's crimes. I researched the people he had stolen from. Some were elderly couples who had trusted him with their retirement savings. But while I was building a case, David was planning his wedding. I saw the announcement in the newspaper. He and Jessica would be married at St. Mary's Church on a Saturday in June. The reception would be at the country club. A week later, I received something unexpected in the mail. It was a wedding invitation addressed to me. The card was elegant and expensive. It invited me to witness the union of David and Jessica. I stared at the invitation in disbelief. Why would David invite his ex-wife to his wedding? Was this some kind of joke? Was he trying to humiliate me further? I called Sarah to ask if she knew about the invitation. She said David had insisted I be invited. He said it would show everyone that we were civilized adults who had moved on. He said it would be good for the family. Sarah thought I should stay home. She said attending would be too painful. She said David was being selfish to put me in this position. But Michael had a different perspective. He said maybe I should go. He said it might give me closure. He said seeing David marry someone else might help me truly let go of the past. I thought about it for days. Part of me wanted to hide at home and pretend the wedding wasn't happening. Part of me was curious to see David's new life up close. And part of me wondered if this was my chance for justice. I made my decision on a Tuesday morning. I would attend the wedding, but I wouldn't go empty-handed. I would bring the evidence of David's crimes. I would let his wedding guests know exactly who they were celebrating. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I kept going over my plan. I had copies of the most damaging documents in a white envelope. I had practiced what I would say. I had chosen an outfit that made me feel strong and confident. Saturday morning arrived bright and sunny. Perfect weather for a wedding. I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress and matching jacket. I did my hair and put on lipstick. I wanted to look dignified when I faced David and his new bride. The drive to St. Mary's Church felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The envelope sat on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. I arrived 30 minutes before the ceremony. The parking lot was already full of expensive cars. David's new life came with wealthy friends and important connections. Inside the church, I chose a seat in the back row. I recognized some faces from our old social circle. They nodded politely but kept their distance. I was the awkward reminder of David's first life. Jessica's family filled the front rows. They looked young and happy and hopeful. They had no idea what kind of man their daughter was marrying. They had no idea what secrets lurked beneath his charming smile. David stood at the altar with his best man. He looked handsome in his expensive tuxedo. His hair was perfectly styled. His smile was confident. He looked like a man who had everything he wanted. The music began, and Jessica walked down the aisle. She was stunning in her white gown. Her face glowed with joy and love. She looked at David like he was her whole world. I felt a pang of sadness watching them. Not because I still loved David, but because I remembered feeling that same joy once. I remembered believing in forever. I remembered thinking love conquered all. The ceremony began with traditional words about love and commitment. The minister spoke about the sacred bond of marriage. He talked about faithfulness and honesty. The irony was almost too much to bear. David and Jessica exchanged vows they had written themselves. David promised to love and protect Jessica always. He promised to be faithful and true. He promised to put her needs before his own. Each word felt like a slap in the face. These were the same promises he had made to me 40 years earlier. These were the vows he had broken without a second thought. Jessica's vows were sweet and hopeful. She promised to stand by David through good times and bad. She promised to support his dreams and share his burdens. She had no idea what those burdens really were. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the marriage, the church fell silent. This was my moment. This was my chance to speak up. But I stayed quiet. I had a better plan. David and Jessica kissed as husband and wife. The congregation erupted in applause. Rice was thrown as they walked back down the aisle. They looked like the perfect couple starting their perfect life. The reception was held in the country club's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Round tables were covered in white linens and pink roses. Everything was elegant and expensive. I found my assigned seat at a table in the back. The other guests at my table were distant relatives who barely knew me. They made polite conversation, but seemed uncomfortable with my presence. David and Jessica made their grand entrance to thunderous applause. They looked radiant as they took their places at the head table. David raised his champagne glass and thanked everyone for sharing their special day. The best man gave a speech about David's success and generosity. He talked about David's integrity and character. He said Jessica was lucky to marry such a wonderful man. The lies made my stomach turn. Then it was time for the father of the bride to speak. Jessica's dad was a retired teacher who spoke simply and from the heart. He welcomed David into their family. He said he trusted David to take care of his precious daughter. I couldn't sit there anymore listening to the praise for a man who had destroyed so many lives. I stood up from my table and walked toward the front of the room. Conversation stopped as people noticed me moving. I reached the microphone as Jessica's father was finishing his speech. He looked confused as I approached. The entire room fell silent, wondering what I was doing. "Excuse me," I said into the microphone. My voice was steady and clear. "I have something to share about the groom." David's face went pale. He started to stand up, but I continued speaking before he could stop me. "Many of you know me as David's first wife," I said. "We were married for 40 years before he left me for Jessica. I came here today not to cause trouble, but to reveal the truth." I pulled out the white envelope and opened it slowly. Inside were copies of bank statements, emails, and legal documents. Evidence of years of fraud and deception. "David has been stealing money from his clients for over a decade," I announced. "He has hidden assets and secret accounts. He has lied to everyone, including the IRS." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Jessica stared at me in shock. David's face was now bright red with anger and embarrassment. "He also has a 10-year-old daughter with another woman," I continued. "Her name is Emma, and he has been paying secret child support while pretending to be faithful to me and now to you." The room erupted in chaos. Guests were talking over each other. Some were standing to get a better view. Jessica was crying and asking David if this was true. David finally found his voice. "She's lying," he shouted. "She's a bitter woman who can't accept that I moved on. Don't listen to her." But I had come prepared for his denials. I held up copies of the documents for everyone to see. Bank statements with his signature. Emails from his personal account. Birth certificate for little Emma, with his name listed as the father. "These documents don't lie," I said calmly. And there are many more where these came from. The authorities will be very interested in reviewing David's business practices. Jessica stood up from her chair, her wedding dress rustling around her. "Is this true, David?" she asked through her tears. "Did you steal money? Do you have another child?" David looked trapped. He could see that his lies were finally catching up with him. He could see that his perfect new life was crumbling in front of 200 wedding guests. "I can explain everything," he said desperately. "This isn't what it looks like. Edith is trying to destroy me because she's jealous." But the damage was done. Jessica's family was staring at David with disgust. His business associates were whispering among themselves. His reputation was being destroyed in real time. I folded the papers back into the envelope and straightened my jacket. I had said what I came to say. I had revealed the truth about the man everyone thought they knew. "Jessica," I said, looking directly at the young bride, "you deserve better than this. You deserve honesty and faithfulness. Don't make the same mistake I did by believing his lies." With that, I walked out of the ballroom. I could hear the chaos continuing behind me, but I didn't look back. I had done what I came to do. The drive home felt completely different from the drive to the church. I felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had finally stood up for myself. I had finally fought back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The local newspaper picked up the story about David's crimes. The district attorney's office opened an investigation. Several of David's clients came forward with their own complaints. Jessica filed for an annulment of their marriage. She moved back in with her parents and refused to speak to David. His perfect new life had lasted exactly 6 hours. David was eventually charged with fraud and embezzlement. He lost his license to practice accounting. He had to sell his house and liquidate his assets to pay back the money he had stolen. Some people criticized me for ruining the wedding. They said I should have handled things privately. They said I was cruel to embarrass Jessica on what should have been the happiest day of her life. But I don't regret what I did. For 40 years, I had stayed quiet while David cheated on me with other women. I had ignored the warning signs and made excuses for his behavior. When I finally discovered he was also stealing and lying about secret children, I realized my silence had allowed him to hurt many people. That day at the wedding, I finally found my voice. I finally stood up for myself and for all the people David had hurt. I finally refused to let him get away with his crimes. My children were proud of me for speaking up. Sarah said I had shown incredible courage. Michael said he was sorry it had taken so long for David's true nature to be exposed. Dr. Martinez said the wedding confrontation was a turning point in my healing. She said I had reclaimed my power and refused to be a victim anymore. She said I had chosen justice over silence. Today, 2 years later, I am living a life I never expected, but truly enjoy. I have new friends from my book club and art classes. I volunteer at the animal shelter 3 days a week. I even started dating a kind widower named Frank. David is serving a 3-year prison sentence for his crimes. He lost everything he valued: his money, his reputation, his freedom. The man who once thought he was above consequences learned that actions have prices. Jessica recovered from the shock and moved to another state for a fresh start. She sent me a thank you card 6 months after the wedding. She said she was grateful I had saved her from making a terrible mistake. I keep that card on my refrigerator as a reminder that speaking the truth, even when it's difficult, is always the right choice. Sometimes justice requires courage. Sometimes revenge is really just honesty with perfect timing. If there's one thing I want other women to know, it's this: never let anyone make you feel like your voice doesn't matter. Never stay quiet to protect someone who wouldn't protect you. and never underestimate the power of an older woman who has finally had enough. David thought he could throw me away and start over with someone younger and prettier. He thought I would disappear quietly into the background of his new life. He thought wrong. I may be 62 years old, but I am stronger now than I was at 22. I know my worth. I know my power. And I know that sometimes the best revenge is simply telling the truth.